Certain political factions and, well, some of Twitter at least, is trying to drag CEO of Walt Disney Company, Bob Chapek, into a political Kobayashi Maru. Bob Chapek, just frankly, isn't going to take the bait. This is exactly the kind of character that I said months ago that this man has. Whether we agree with everything he does or not, whether we agree with everything Disney is doing or not, Bob Chapek is not a stupid man. We're going to talk about this today. We're actually going to give you some facts surrounding this story, including the actual legislation itself currently passing through the legislature in the state of Florida. And we're going to talk about what's going on with this, with Bob Chapek and the Walt Disney Company, my opinion, and of course, my buddy Kamran Pasha here to join us. Stay tuned. I'm going to give you some precursor to this, and then we're going to get to Kamran. Here we go. Renegade Online. Welcome back, folks. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. Good to see everybody out there. And of course, as always, if you are one of the 60 or 70% of folks out there that are not yet subscribed to this channel, please make sure you hit that little subscribe button right below this video before you head out the door today. I would appreciate that. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and do leave a comment. We always like the comments. I'll try to get to as many as I can. I'll just say right up front, I'll probably be buried in the big Apple event. I'm a big Apple gearhead. And the Apple event probably is going to be hitting right about the time that you're watching this video on Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, depending on where you are. So I will do my best, I promise, but I might get a little bit too excited about some of the new Mac desktop computers supposedly coming out. So we'll see. We'll see if some of the rumors and the leaks were right. I think some of them are dead on. At least I'm hoping they are. So anyway, let's get to this story. And as I said in the introduction, look, politics is not something that we typically do here. But because this story has so deeply dragged Disney and specifically CEO Bob Chapek into it, this is something that I want to cover because it touches on some elements of Bob Chapek that I have discussed on this channel before. I have told you that Chapek is a rather apolitical animal. He's not the typical historical California type. He's really not from there. He's a very different CEO than Robert Iger, who chimed in on this, and Chapek refused to. And we've talked about before how Chapek has said one thing, and then Iger has come back and refuted it, and vice versa. We can see that these are two very, very different guys, two very different mindsets. And I want everybody to bear that in mind as we move forward. So we've seen this story talked about for the last several days. And I've kind of blown it off. And then, today we have had an internal memo from Disney that got leaked from Bob Chapek to the Disney staff. And of course, this has now been thrown out all over the place. Kamran Pasha had a Patreon piece earlier today on this. It has also made it to Deadline and Variety and everywhere now. So this is where we are. And again, what we try to do on this channel is, when it comes to stuff like this, the hard business stuff, we try to stick to the facts on things, right? So there has been a lot of, let's just say, hyperbolic language that has been used to reference this bill, as we can see right here in the title of this article from Deadline, talking about the Florida House bill, the quote-unquote "Don't Say Gay" bill. And Bob Chapek's response, or at least according to a lot of folks out there, lack of response to this. So I want to actually look at the bill itself, and then I'm going to give you some thoughts. We're going to look at the bill first, read the actual language of the bill. It's not very long, and it's not at all terribly complicated. And then we're going to look at some of the articles here, like I said, from Deadline, and I want you, the viewer that's watching, to come to your own conclusions on whether this matches up. Let's just put it that way. Remember, like we always talk about, Twitter and Facebook is just not reality. It is very much put through a social and political lens, much like we see from media on this. And again, because this involves Bob Chapek, this is why I want to go down this road. So let's start with the bill itself. This is House Bill 1577 that began in the Florida House of Representatives. I believe it has now moved on to the Senate. Probably will get approved and move over to Governor Ron DeSantis' desk sometime later this week, at least according to news articles out there. But let's see what it actually says first before we start diving into some discussion on this. And Kamran Pasha will be joining us very shortly to offer his thoughts as well. From the actual bill, quote, requiring district school boards to adopt procedures that comport with certain provisions of law for notifying a student's parent of specified information, requiring such procedures to reinforce the fundamental right of parents to make decisions regarding the upbringing and control of their children in a specified manner, prohibiting the procedures from prohibiting a parent from accessing certain records, providing construction, prohibiting a school district from adopting procedures or student support forms that require school district personnel to withhold from a parent specified information or that encourage or have the effect of encouraging a student to withhold from a parent such information. Providing an exception, prohibiting school district personnel from discouraging or prohibiting parental notification and involvement in critical decisions affecting a student's mental, emotional, or physical well-being, prohibiting a school district, and this is the key language that certain folks out there in the social media spheres have really glommed onto and then, of course, created the hyperbolic language from this. In critical decisions affecting a student's mental, emotional, or physical well-being, prohibiting a school district from encouraging classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity in primary grade levels or in a specified manner, authorizing a parent to bring an action against a school district to obtain a declaratory judgment that a school district procedure or practice violates certain provisions of law, providing for the additional award of injunctive relief, damages, reasonable attorney fees, and court costs to certain parents, requiring certain training developed or provided by a school district to adhere to standards established by the Department of Education, requiring the department to review and update as necessary specified materials by a certain date, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so let's talk about what this says. I'll break it down for you in very layman's terms. This is a bill that was composed to ultimately protect parental rights to decide what their children will or will not be taught in a classroom setting. In this case, particularly in public schools, the government schools, okay, in the state of Florida. What it also talks about is that a school district or the Department of Education in the state of Florida cannot effectively, and I'm very much paraphrasing at this point, they cannot force kids to learn something, and they more specifically cannot force a child or themselves conceal that type of information or force the students to conceal that information from their parents. They cannot prevent a parent from requiring a school to provide them with the curriculum in a given class or course or what a teacher discussed. Basically, it is an open door policy. It is a transparency policy so that students and parents will always have full access to all information of what is being taught in a classroom, but it also specifically prohibits Florida state schools from engaging in effectively social political discussions in primary grade levels. Now, one issue with this that has come up, and the author of the bill has stated this as well, is that the grade levels are a bit unspecified. If you look at the U.S. Department of Education, they would tell you that primary grades are K through 12, and that's fine as well. If they want to have this rule apply K through 12, that's fine. At the end of the day, it's my opinion that my 3 children are my responsibility. And ultimately, it is the parents, myself included, who get to decide what a school should be engaging in terms of academic discussion. Years ago, this wasn't a problem. right? Schools were doing their jobs, at least concisely in terms of teaching what they should be teaching. And that is the basic core language arts, maths, and sciences, right? The old reading, writing, and arithmetic. We need to be teaching English. We need to be teaching math. We need to be teaching physics and chemistry and algebra and history, things like this. When schools start deviating into social and political issues, it is my opinion and the opinion of a tremendous number of parents that they are overstepping their bounds. Certain things like sexuality and social politics, those are things that should be left to be discussed at home. Now, of course, there are courses in schools, and there have been for many decades, like human sexuality or sex education, as it used to be called, things like this, human physiology, human biology, so on and so forth. That's all fine and dandy. And a lot of times schools will have parents sign acknowledgement waivers saying, hey, look, just letting you know, we're going to be talking about human sexuality in your child's sophomore year in high school or something like that. That's fine. Okay, I get all that. Once we deviate that into things like social politics, that's where the waters get very muddied. And a lot of parents just don't want this done, and I don't blame them. I don't think a school is a place for this. Now, that being said, this is where this comes in, and this is where the Disney angle comes in, and this is where this discussion takes place on this channel, is this. And this is what Kamran and I are going to get into at this point. There are a lot of folks out there that are upset with the fact that, Bob Chapek and Disney, by extension, has not chimed in on this publicly and basically shamed the Florida state legislature and the governor of Florida and all this other kind of stuff. And they've given it this cute little Twitter name, the quote, "Don't Say Gay" bill. Nothing of that sort, in my view, is in that bill. There's nothing preventing students from discussing this on their own. There's nothing preventing parents from discussing this with their children. The only thing it does prevent is for a board of education in the state of Florida or a school district to forcibly compel, or a teacher in a school to forcibly compel a discussion on these topics in a formal classroom setting. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's fine. That, again, these are discussions to be had at home with parents, not in school. Oh, but some parents don't do this. Well, that's on the parents. That's not on the school. Schools are there to give young children a well-rounded scientific education. They are there to make sure that their brains, their minds develop, based on critical thinking skills, not subjective political or social issues, right? That's not what schools should be there for. They are there to give kids the critical thinking skills so that at some point down the road, if the parents and the schools have done their jobs correctly, that those children become functional, thinking, capable adults, productive members of society. That's it. That is the job of a school. Beyond that, it's life experience, it's the parents, it's the families at home. That's up to them to do the rest of it. Now, I understand that sometimes that doesn't always work out. It's not a perfect world. But this is where we are. And this is what they demand Bob Chapek get involved in. A guy that runs a theme park company. A guy that runs a film and television studio company. This is the problem I have, is that these people out there seem to demand that every facet of society bend the knee and bow down at their altar. This is becoming a problem. We are seeing this in every facet of media out there these days, and it's becoming so frustrating. And it's one of the reasons why so many YouTubers out there and fans of big franchises get more and more frustrated every single day, because so much of this subjective social political element is being shoved into every aspect that we see in film and television. And now Now they want it shoved down your kids' throats in school, or at least they don't want it prevented from being shoved down your kids' throats in school. And I take issue with that. That's just not what schools are for. Again, this is not me agreeing or disagreeing with having these discussions with children. It's simply a matter of school is not the right place for it. So we're going to get into this specifically on how this ties in to Bob Chapek. And for that, I'm bringing in my good buddy once again, Kamran Pasha.
Well, and I scooped the town apparently, because this morning at about 8:30 a.m., I have several Patreon members who are actually Disney employees who have leaked things to me in the past. This morning, an employee around 8:30 a.m., this was a broad email that was sent out first thing in the morning from Mr. Chapek to Disney employees. I don't know who everyone got it, but he got it. And he immediately forwarded it to me. And I immediately posted on Patreon, only discovered that nobody else had it yet. And about 20 minutes later, Deadline posted. I'm like, yeah, I think I just beat Deadline. Right? So that's plugging my Patreon. But yeah, that we're actually scooping things, which is nice. But so that's why I had some time to process this, even if it was only 20, 30 minutes before the rest of the town did, right? So I'm like, wow, okay, this is amazing. There's a history to this. I know from, you've talked about the history of the bill and their journey in your intro, but there's also history to how Mr. Chapek has been handling this. There's been pressure building on him for about 10 days now to speak up on it. It really was triggered, I think, when his predecessor, Bob Iger, put out a tweet, condemning this legislation. And then people say, well, where's Chapek's tweet? Where's the Disney corporate statement? Because Mr. Iger would have put out a Disney corporate statement, likely,
And let me bring that up real quick so we can show everybody. I actually have it here.
Okay.
Let's bring up Mr. Iger's tweet. And Cameron, you and I have talked about this. Robert Iger and Bob Chapek are two very different people, and we keep telling people this. And this could not be a more perfect example. So here's the article from Deadline that came out shortly after your Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Iger, quote, "I'm with the president on this. If passed, this bill would put vulnerable young LGBTQ people in jeopardy." Mm-hmm. And he retweets President Biden, saying, especially kids who will be impacted by this hateful, his words, bill, to know that you are loved and accepted just as you are. Nobody's arguing that point. I have your back, and my administration will continue to fight for the protections and safety you deserve. And this is where I think a lot of the hyperbolic language came in, because there were so many people, including President Biden and others, that seemed to allude to the fact that this bill would somehow jeopardize the safety of students.
It's hard. I mean, it's the narrative is that if a 7-year-old child is not told by their teacher about gender identity issues, that they will then feel unsafe to reveal their 7-year-old gender identity thing. Look, I grew up in a generation where we weren't having that conversation, so it's a little, for a lot of older people, older than 21 maybe, it seems like society wasn't having these conversations, or even only 5 years ago, but now we're here. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, and the way it's represented is that if the public school system does not inculcate these ideas in young children, prepubescent children, that it will not, it's not even at the place of this will allow old bigotries to remain. It will somehow actually endanger people who are not even sexually aware yet, or their puberty has not even hit, right? And so it's, and so the claim is that people who are not yet even sexually capable are nonetheless able, they may not be able to know what pants to put on that morning, but they know their gender identity, right? And that's not something that's in any way socially influenced or any of that. It's just natural. Okay, that's another conversation for the time, but that's the claim that's put out there. You read the bill. The bill certainly does not seem to be promoting that. At least that's not the language of the bill. And so that's more of a claim by certain activists as to a social impact, which I think certainly is debatable.
Yeah, and exactly that, what you just said. I mean, this is that you're right. This is a topic for a whole other type of show that I don't want to get into that much.
We don't need to get into the weeds on this.
No, we don't need to get into the weeds, because the weeds are not important. What's important is the actual language of the bill, what it says. Again, my view and the view of, quite frankly, many others out there, the hyperbolic reaction on social media to what they claim that this bill is, that it is not. But what's most important here, as we begin just now with Robert Iger's tweet saying, "Oh, this is the kind of thing that 2 years ago, maybe not even quite 2 years ago, that Robert Iger would have probably jumped in on this one."
Oh, he would definitely have put out a public statement on Disney letterhead stating this is, as the chairman and CEO of Disney, this is our position, that this is what he said in his tweet. And then of course there would have been ramifications to their business activities in Florida. There would have been pressure for even if the Florida legislators were like, well, thank you for your opinion, we don't care. Then there would have been certainly an internal call to shut down its operations or boycott Florida. And, boycott is often thrown around in these kinds of situations.
Sure.
And he would have felt, having put Disney's as the company's label on a stance on this issue, he would have felt internal pressure to actually do a boycott. But as you know, this is shutting down the operations in Florida is financial suicide for Disney Corporation. It just is.
Yeah. And again, this is one of these things, like you and I have talked about before. This is, Chapek's a very different guy than Iger. He's not a Hollywood creature. He's not a political creature. This story right here, and let me pull this up from the headline again. This story right here confirms what you and I have been saying. Now, a lot of people were going to look at this right now, and let's talk about the memo that he sent out.
Yeah.
A lot of people are going to look at this right now and think, oh, well, okay, he didn't do that, but he sent this memo out, and this memo said this, that, and the other thing. I want everybody out there to understand this memo that he sent was a quote unquote, it was a private memo to Disney employees. Now, that being said, Bob Chapek, I guarantee you, was fully aware that probably within minutes of him sending this email out on this topic, that it was going to make its way to the public trades.
When you put out an email, that is always what's going to happen, especially from a position he's in. And it's already happened before, because in the past, he put out his memo just a couple of months ago. It feels like returning a couple of months ago, stating the 3 new pillars of Disney, including we will not make the audience our adversary. That was leaked within minutes. He knows what's going to happen. So this memo was crafted for the general public, knowing that it would be in the hands of the general public within 10 minutes, which it was.
It was. And of course, this memo was a bit lengthy, and, but there are some highlights in here, and I'm going to pull some of these up. And in fact, this was in a tweet that was recited again in this article here. Let me pull this back up from Good Morning America. I don't care what Good Morning America has to say, but we're going to quote. This is the key piece of Mr. Chapek's memo. Quote, "We understand how important this issue is to our LGBTQ plus employees and many others. For nearly a century, Disney has been a unifying force that brings people together. We are determined that it remains a place where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. The biggest impact that we can have in creating a more inclusive world is through the inspiring content that we produce, the welcoming culture that we create here, and the diverse community organizations we support, including those representing the LGBTQ community." Now, that is a very well thought, diplomatic, good business response. And the key to understand here, in my opinion, Cameron, I want to get your thoughts on this, is that, again, this was a private memo that was sent to Disney employees.
Yes.
Even though Mr. Chapek was fully well aware that this was going to get leaked out to the press after all the kerfuffle in the past several days, since all of this started in the Twitter sphere, which is frankly not reality. It's not real life. Facebook and Twitter are not real life. But the people on there that are very active seem to think it is. I get that. But he wanted to respond in his own way. He wasn't going to kowtow and respond in the manner that was being demanded of him by the Twitterati out there. But he responded in the way that I thought was very professional, saying, look, we're not going to get involved in politics. We're not going to get involved in because, again, I think Chapek knows once he opens that door that he personally, as the CEO of Disney, is going to jump in on a political issue, or in this case, a specific piece of legislation that is making its way through, in this case, the Florida state legislature. Once he opens that door, then that door is open. And it's going to be expected every time that something quote unquote controversial comes through that state legislature that he, on behalf, speaking for Disney, the Walt Disney Company, is going to be expected to respond. So he responded without actually responding, which I thought was brilliant. And this is the way that corporate America should handle things. I'm not a fan at all of corporate CEOs, especially big Fortune 500 companies, digging their heels in on all these political issues, because it's just frankly bad for business. You're always going to piss somebody off. In this case, you're going to piss off, half or more than half of the people out there responding one way or the other on this thing. This was as I mentioned in my opening statement, my cold open, this was a Kobayashi Maru moment. This was a Captain Kirk Kobayashi Maru moment that Twitter was trying to force onto Bob Chapek. And Bob Chapek said, I ain't taking the bait. I'm just not even going to play the game because I don't care about this game. I got better stuff to do. And I think he responded to this and he handled it well with an internal memo saying, look, we address all these issues in the content that we produce. We're not going to dig our heels on a particular bill. So Cameron, how about you? Where are you on this?
Well, I went to business school. I got my MBA, and and wasn't necessarily a great MBA student, but I did very well in corporate communications. The only class I got honors in, right? So Paul Argenti was my professor at the Tuck Business School, and he's still a brilliant professor of corporate communications. And so this will one day this entire incident is going to make a business school case in the very near future, because it's really literally textbook example of how you handle a situation like this. And we're talking about why it's so important at this historical moment where Hollywood has been the last decade. But let's look at the language of this. The genius of this is he just focuses on his employees the whole time. He doesn't talk about broader social things, about society, about the human condition, none of that stuff, right? He talks about, my goal is to make my employees, our employees at Disney, feel safe and secure, right? We understand that this particular issue is important to many of you, but we are not going to get involved in that issue. We are going to get involved in making sure this corporation makes you feel welcome in here, right? You can have a job here. You can bring your kids to our parks and everything and feel accepted, right? Where what you choose to teach them at home, what other people choose to teach them at home, we're not going to get involved in. Always, we're going to treat you well, which is all a company can do. Right?
That's all they should do. Not all of them do that, but that's what they should do.
So you're not gonna face a lawsuit from a random person who's outside of your corporation because they don't like your political stance. If you mistreat an employee, you will face a discrimination lawsuit, and you will lose it very likely. So he handled it exactly, focused on what we will do as a company, which is continue to have a certain safe environment for people of a broad range of sexual identities and all that, right? Great. And he left it at that. And what I have to admire him for, I really have to admire him for, he could have just left it at that. He could have just, and there was some boilerplate pablum that Disney as a company tweeted out last Friday. It was like a tweet of 2 or 3 sentences. They were essentially this empty pablum, right? But he went further than that on purpose. He then talks openly about the fact that Disney gives money to politicians of both political parties, both major political parties.
As all these big companies do. Every damn one of them.
He says, this is reality, folks. We give money. I know it's a shocker to you. We have given money to Republicans as well as Democrats. He says it.
No.
He says it because it's time.
They gave money to Ron DeSantis, y'all, and they probably also gave money to every Democrat politician in the state as well.
And he's blunt. He says we do this to get access for our businesses in Florida.
Absolutely, they all do this.
He's just stating what has been sort of privately known, but at least rational people, that's what happens, right? But now he's like, I'm like the daddy's coming into the little kids who are crying. I'm gonna tell you how the world works. Let me tell you how the world works. It's how the world works. We need to do business in Florida. We will give money to everyone there, all politicians, because we need all of them on our side. Some of them are going to vote on stuff that I might not like, you might not like, but our company needs to keep a good relationship with the state of Florida government. And we're going to continue to do that because billions of dollars are being made by this corporation in the state of Florida. And we simply aren't going to upset that cart. We're going to make you feel safe and we're going to do business. And that's a good thing. He's no longer, what's amazing about this thing is there's no defensiveness to this memo. There's no feeling of apologetics.
No.
He's like, this is what we do. We're going to do our job. We're going to make you feel safe, and we're going to run our businesses, and we're not going to get involved in this thing. And that is a good thing. And case closed. And it's like daddy finally coming in, where the kids have been running wild all weekend, finally laying down the law in a loving but firm manner. This is how things are going to be from now on. And that's it. There's no argument about it, because you need these boundaries for this to work. For this family to work, we have to have boundaries. For this company to work, we have to have these boundaries. And we live in the real world, which is I got to give money to Democrats. I got to give money to Republicans. And I don't have to like everything they do. But I need all of those politicians essentially in my pocket. You can't get more blunt than that. So
I agree. And you talk about in the pocket, and I want to address that because you bring up a great point that I think everybody out there really needs to take a deep breath, sit back, and understand. For years, we have heard this mantra that, big business, big corporate America or whatever, they're really running the show, and they're the ones that run politics. And certainly that's an argument that can be made. But I want you to take a step back, and I want you to think for a second about this, because this kind of story is a great example of how the road goes both ways. And that is that sometimes, more often than not, the reason these corporations are doing this, they are engaging in these kind of politics, they are engaging in these types of campaign contributions or PACs, super PACs and all this kind of stuff, is because if they don't, it's not the corporate climate, it's the political climate that expects these corporations to hand them big fat checks. Otherwise, they will just pass legislation or make these businesses' lives hell in these states. And that is why these big corporate entities like Disney write these checks to campaigns and politicians to insulate themselves from, frankly, in many cases, very punitive legislation that can otherwise hinder their business, their free enterprise and the free market.
And that's reality. That's
it is. And that's counterintuitive. That is probably a very counterintuitive statement to what a lot of people out there have been imbibing for 20, 30, 40 years in the media and political climate in this country. And I'm not saying that, the businesses are victims at all. No, that's not the case. I'm just saying that the road does go both ways. Okay. The door swings both ways in terms of politics and business. And what we're seeing here with this Disney story is the door coming back in the other direction. And it's like, look, we're here to support everybody. We're not going to get involved in every little piece of legislation that you do, because let's be honest, this piece of legislation doesn't matter a hill of beans. This has no effect whatsoever on the Walt Disney Company. Nothing. And bear in mind, and this is one thing that maybe Bob Chapek, and I'm sure, I say maybe, probably definitely couldn't put in a memo like that. Hope everybody stops and thinks that, the Walt Disney Company employs tens of thousands of people. And the I-4 corridor in Orlando is a relatively conservative place to be. They probably have a lot of employees that like this legislation.
Correct.
And, this is, again, so what does Chapek do? Do I want to appease a bunch of ne'er-do-wells on Twitter that mean nothing to me? Or, I've got 10,000 employees that really don't want to have social political issues shoved down their kids' throats in the public schools that, frankly, Disney is freaking paying for by and large with the taxes they pump into that state. Probably more than anybody else in the state of Florida. Let's be honest. So, this is one of these things. Again, this was a really shrewd move by Chapek. You would not have gotten this with Robert Iger. Robert Iger would have run out there from his little throne in California and talked about, how terrible this was. And he would have used the Twitter slang for this bill as the quote unquote, don't say gay bill, which is just typical political hyperbole. Again, we read the bill in the intro. We spent 10 minutes talking about that bill, going through it literally line by line. It's a very short bill. Anybody can go look it up. House Bill 1557 from Florida, and see what it says for yourself. Do your own research. Go look at the facts for yourself. I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you that it says something it doesn't, unlike maybe some other places out there. We're going to talk about facts here, as far as I'm concerned.
Well,
but go ahead, Cameron.
Well, what's fascinating to me, and it is really a milestone moment in Hollywood, is that even if Mr. Iger, was more conservative personally, in the political culture of the last decade, he would have felt compelled by the social pressures of the environment to essentially give in to the Twitterati, what people now call the agitati. They're always agitated, right? The agitati on Twitter.
Twidiots.
Yeah, to give in to them, because that's what the entire industry was doing. That it was follow the flock. Everyone, the moment you had one person tweet something, the entire corporate communications group went in crisis mode. The CEO got involved. The CFO got involved. Everyone humiliated themselves before some random person named Paul J712347922, who has like one follower, right? And they would all do it, right? And so the fact that everyone assumed that over the last 10 days, as rising social media agitation kept going, that he would buckle, and that he doesn't buckle. He puts out a very blunt, lengthy message, not just to the company, but to the country, to the whole public. Mm-hmm. This is how this company is going to handle this stuff moving forward. We're not going to let this distract from our focus, our only focus, which is profit for our shareholders, right? That's our only focus. And part of that is making sure our employees don't sue us for discrimination. So we're going to treat you well, right? And so that's all of that is there. So this is a milestone moment, because you wouldn't have seen a memo like this come out of any Hollywood studio 18 months ago, or a year ago, or 6 months ago. This is a major, major thing. And you see the comments on Deadline and other trades. The people in the industry are freaking out. They can't believe that he's not bowing to this. And the confidence that I saw in that memo, the complete confidence that no one's going to budge him from this, right?
No.
And comes from knowing that he's got the board on his side, or at the very least, he's got the board member that matters, which is his boss, Chairman Susan Arnold, who is a member of the LGBTQ community herself. And if she felt he was wrong here, she would have had a conversation with him. I need you to go out and speak for this. She clearly feels this is not something the company needs to get involved in, as a member of that community herself, as a powerful member of that community, who I'm sure has faced.
And I guarantee you, she read that memo before it went out.
Of course she did. She may have dictated parts of it.
Yeah, she probably did.
She may have. I mean, look, she's his boss, right?
And Susan Arnold probably doesn't want to get involved in it. There's a lot of us out there. I mean, I've had friends in that community for many, many years. Mm-hmm. And one of them, as a matter of fact, is a political campaign consultant, primarily for Republicans. Mm-hmm. Sure. That's what he does. And
I know several conservative gay men in Hollywood.
I know quite a few. It's like this is a foreign concept to people out there in the Hollywood press. It's so out there for them. But no, I mean, kudos to Chapek for not caving into this. He doesn't care. Obviously, Susan Arnold knows better, because it's like I mean, there's things that I believe in that are part of my kind of lifestyle that I don't want the government to jump and get involved in from a legislative standpoint. It's not necessary. There are some things that belong at home, and there's some things that just don't belong getting entrenched in corporate America in this case. And people need to take a step back, take a breath, and really look at this factually, like I said, for what it is, because I think that's the key component.
I want to give you an example from what I experienced recently on working on several shows in the last few years, where this was the agitati were in charge. And so on one show I worked on, there was a particular political stance that the showrunner, what was happening was all the showrunners of various shows were literally goading each other on Twitter to take a particular stance on illegal immigration, right? Versus Mr. Trump and some of the policies he was doing to restrict the border, right? And they were literally emailing each other and challenging each other publicly on Twitter. Has your show put out? So all the shows would gather their writing staffs and take a photo of them holding up a political sign, a predetermined political sign stating that you support this particular political agenda versus Mr. Trump or whatever. Right. And every show was challenging other shows. The showrunners were challenging to shame them and humiliate them, and every single show caved. And everyone, and I would look at these pictures, and people who I know don't agree with this are all standing there holding the thing. And it's just, this is what was happening here. It became this essentially, everyone's opinion was being hijacked by the showrunners. Their shows were being given opinions rather than every one of you can go on Twitter and hold that sign up individually. You're well-known writers, respected members of Hollywood. If you have, of course, none of those things made any difference to the world events. It was just there for PR purposes to make the virtual signaling. That's all it was, right? But if you feel this is going to make effects, you don't need the show to have a political position on this. You just have your own position and be loud about it. But the shows were requiring that their writers do this. And, and there would be emails. I saw some emails where showrunners would say to their staff, you're not required to do this. I understand and respect if you don't agree with the political stance we as a show are putting out, and you will not be required to participate. Not one single person would interpret that to mean you are safe if you don't participate. It would literally be like, just reminding you that I'm aware, if you don't do this, I'm aware that you don't agree with the politics, and I don't like that.
Oh, it's a subtle message from The Godfather.
It's actually a threat. It's a threat. It's a threat posited as you're welcome to not do this.
It's like that line from The Casino. If the bosses in Kansas say something, it's like a papal bull. You do it. It's like.
And so everyone caved. Everyone people didn't agree with it. Everyone standing there with these photos. Of course, it made no difference. The policies didn't change during Mr. Trump's tenure, and it made no difference whatsoever, right? Yeah. But they all virtue signaled each other. This was the pressure. Why is a show forcing its writers to, under the rubric of the show, do that? But that was the culture we were in. Mr. Chapek has single-handedly ended that culture. Now, someone who also shares his approach, David Zaslav.
I was just going to say that. I was like, we got another guy coming in.
Let's do this.
Yeah.
Now Chapek has set him up to knock it out of the park, because Zaslav's like, that's what I'm going to do. Disney's already doing it.
I was just going to say, that was my next point to make. You took the words right out of my. Zaslav is coming in. Get ready, because that's going to be the next sumbitch that's going to get right behind Chapek in the same vein. Now, look, I want to be clear out there, because people are probably, we're still seeing this kind of stuff from Disney and that kind of stuff. Guys, Disney has another Reimagine Tomorrow conference coming up for whatever employees are participating in it. They're still going to have things like that, right? I don't want to get.
They all do that stuff.
Yeah, they have to. Because that's and again, that stuff was put into
place. It keeps HR happy. They can use it for PR. Look, we care about.
It keeps HR happy. It keeps the lawsuits at bay. It keeps. Look,
exactly. We don't discriminate. Look, I've seen the situations. When you've seen a situation, I've been in situations where we're like, I've seen discrimination and spoke up against it. Just like, we can't have discrimination. We all did the special HR event for Black people.
Exactly. We can't have that. We did our harassment seminar.
So
that's why all these companies do this, so they can say, well, we checked this box.
So we don't have we
can't have any corporate liability because we checked these boxes. That's all this is anymore, folks. But this today, this whole thing about Chapek refusing to publicly engage in this, and he's like, sorry, I just don't give a fuck. That's his attitude. It's like this. Now, if the Florida State Legislature passes, for example, or tries to pass a bill that would fiscally impact Disney, if they propose some type of new sales tax legislation, or if they propose some type of new corporate tax legislation or something like that would have a direct, true, legitimate business impact on Disney, then I would expect to see Chapek and Disney come out and say, look, this is going to impact our employees. This is going to take more money out of their pocket. This is gonna, this is gonna raise the cost of living for them. This is gonna cost more corporate taxes, which is gonna raise the price at part, whatever.
Well, and the other thing that could affect
financial impact, or something like that from a business perspective, I expect. But social political issues, no, there's no reason for Disney or anybody else to get involved in this. And kudos to Bob Chapek.
And there is a very high risk, not just employees, but just general residents of Florida and people who go to Florida for vacation may say, I want to raise my kids my own way. You, Disney, are telling me that I'm wrong and I'm immoral for wanting my kids to raise my prepubescent children in this way. I'm not going to come to your park. There's a very real risk of the very thing that these people are calling boycott Florida. There's a very risk that Disney would be boycotted in a real way by people that would take offense if it took a stance they didn't like.
That's the Kobayashi Maru situation I'm talking about. It doesn't matter if Bob Chapek came out publicly one way or another on this issue, he loses. It doesn't matter. It's a no-win. He's either going to piss off one side or the other, and he elected to just, we're not going to get involved in this. We support legislators on both sides of the political aisle. We support the community. We have employees. We have guests at the park. We have cast that are of that community. We support them. We support their lifestyle. That's their choice. As far as from a political environment, we don't get engaged in these political issues as a matter of corporate principle. Done.
And the rest of Hollywood is going to follow. I mean, the rest of Hollywood is going to follow. David Zaslav will be the major cheerleader of this thing that,
Oh, yes.
Yeah, but then others will follow as well. I mean, I think right now, CBS, Paramount, whatever the hell this company is, right? Viacom, it's collapsing. I just don't even know what the company is anymore. I don't know who's in charge. I don't know how it's structured. I don't know anything.
Next week, it'll be Metamount.
Yeah, that thing, that leftover of Viacom, whatever that is, right?
Yeah, whatever.
That conglomerate, right? I don't think they even know who's in charge. So I don't know that think they're in a position to make any political stance.
I haven't done any videos on that because it makes my eyes go cross.
I mean, literally, I can't figure out can't even figure out the corporate structure anymore. I don't care. I don't care, right? But they're not in any position to have to.
They're probably trying to sell off a big part of that company's my opinion. So,
but look, the others. The others will eventually. They may not be as loud about it, but now Mr. Chapek has given them all permission. You have to look after this guy. This guy's done two amazing things in the 2 months that he's been officially there without Bob Iger over him. In those 2 months, he's given Hollywood two permissions. The first permission was it's okay to put the audience first and not fight them. In fact, that's what you need to do, right? And then we're hearing that other studios are like, oh, this guy finally said it's okay not to fight the audience. It's okay. In fact, we should do that. If they're doing that, they're going to make money. We should do that. He gave the town permission to put its customers first again. And now he's given the town permission to just get out of things that are going to create controversy and take away from its bottom line. He's given them permission in two things that they desperately needed over this last decade of essentially mentally ill lunatics running this asylum here, right? And he's pulling them out. And it had to be done this bluntly because when you've had the lunatics running the asylum and it's time for daddy to come back in and restore order, you have to establish you have to explain why order is a good thing because nobody remembers it anymore. All they see is chaos. And that you listen to the craziest voice. Well, we're not going to do that. And you have to explain why in a world that's forgotten why.
Yeah. I agree. And I think at the end of the day, this is just one of those things that Chapek knew was a hot potato item. No business to get involved in it. Schools don't need to be involved in teaching this. Schools need to be teaching our kids, math, chemistry, physics, algebra, English, reading, history, so on and so forth.
And they can't be teaching that 2 + 2 could equal 5 under certain circumstances.
Yeah, I know. I don't want subjective education in that sense. School is there to take, as I said in the intro, school exists or school should exist or historically has existed to take young minds, young skulls full of mush, as a famous radio host once put it, and turn them into functioning, thinking, capable, mature adults that can make cognizant decisions on their own as they get older in life and live a life of experience. The rest of the stuff, the subjective stuff, the social political issues, the family issues, religion, all that kind of stuff, that comes from home, that comes from the family, that comes from mom and dad and grandparents.
That's how normal people think. We've been living in an era where bad ideas from Vladimir Lenin have been resurrected, where families don't teach people, the state teaches people, because the state, these are really bad ideas from 19.
That's a whole other issue that scares me about this topic. We've seen this too many times in history. Turn your kids over to the state and don't ask questions.
Yeah, you have no right. You don't know what is right to raise them with. I do, and I will do that. And if you don't agree to that, I've got a bunch of guns that will enforce my will, right? And so, a lot of people think that's
seen that before a few times. Never turns out well,
and it doesn't sustain itself because human nature always restores itself. And so this is what we're seeing here. People were despairing that Hollywood would never, ever, ever get off this track. I've heard it for years, that it would always be on what we call the quote woke track, that they didn't care about making money. And I was like, yeah, for a while when they're flush with cash, you can have people not care about making money. But when they're not flush with cash, which is what has happened in the last 2 years,
that money bin's gotten dry.
At the end of the day, everyone's got to pay their rent. Everyone's got to pay their rent. Everyone's got to put food on the table. Every single person has to do it. And when the resources are gone, and with rising inflation, rising gas prices, all this other stuff, the economy is not exactly doing what it was in 2019. And the idea that these bad ideas would be sustainable when the whole system is collapsing and needs to be rebuilt is not a rational thing. And that's why there was nothing else that Bob Chapek could do. Because if he had kowtowed to this situation, he might as well just hand in his resignation letter. He's giving up the company.
Yeah, he's ceding control of every decision at this point to the public mob. To Twitter, to Facebook, and everything else. And he's not doing that. And again, I cannot. I'm going to bring this up one last time before we close out, because, dear Lord, I cannot. This is an "I told you so" for Kamran and myself.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Iger and Bob Chapek are two different people. That doesn't mean that everything that they do is going to be different, but their mindset, their corporate management style, their mindset, these are two different men. And this right here is why. Because I know Robert Iger is no longer with the Walt Disney Company, but I guarantee you that he would have sent out almost this exact same tweet if he still was.
Under the Disney CEO, on a Disney account.
Under the Disney account, yes. He might have worded it slightly differently, but he would have publicly addressed this and still sided with one side or the other. And again, this is not an aspersion to any group of people whatsoever. It doesn't matter which side you're on. The issue with this is, should a company at Disney stature or any stature take sides with this? Because this is not in their wheelhouse. And this is what this all boils down to. They have a broad audience to serve with a broad, diverse opinion on politics and religion and social issues and all this kind of stuff. They are not, Bob Chapek, at least when I say they are not in the business of trying to alienate any of that audience. That does not mean that they might not make a movie or have a character here and there that represents, a lifestyle or something that an individual or a group of individuals may not like or disagree with. But as a corporate stance from an official position on politics, Bob Chapek is not taking Disney down these roads anymore. And that's a great sign.
And even on that, the last thing I said, even on the note, because some people raise a concern, well, he says we're going to tell it in storytelling. So that means he's still going to embrace wokeness. I'm like, no, they're going to continue to do what they think works for the various marketplaces. For example, we have there was the Jungle Book movie that just came out, right? Was it called Jungle? What was it called? The Jungle Cruise movie, right?
Came out? Oh yeah. Well, they had two. They had both. So I just okay. The one with Dwayne Johnson, The Rock.
Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. Okay.
Jungle Cruise.
Jungle Cruise, right? Well, I enjoyed that movie very much, but then there was this moment where I literally laughed out loud in the audience because I knew what they were doing. They have this enjoyable family movie, adventure, blah blah blah, and then suddenly we have a moment in a very distinct scene where The Rock sits down with one of the characters, the male character who's on it, and the guy says, well, I lost my social status in Britain because I was not allowed to love who I love. And so it's a sort of veiled reference the fact that he's
back
gay.
in the day when Britain, that
Gay,
was a crime.
You can't say that, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's a nice. First of all, it has nothing to do with the rest of the movie because it's never his sexuality is never referenced anywhere in this family movie ever again. It's just a little moment here, and so that's made to satisfy certain elements of the American and perhaps European audience. Yep. And guess what? It's perfectly done to edit that entire little scene out for Middle East, for Africa, for Latin America, for all those other places.
For China.
For China, for people
for everybody.
Like, I don't want my kids hearing this stuff, right, in a Disney movie. And so that is a strategic business choice. It's like the business choice we saw in The Rise of Skywalker, where they have a 2 women kiss in the small crowd in the background, right? To say, well, look, we have LGBTQ, right? We have a lesbian kiss on the screen. The camera goes by, you don't barely see it, and easily cut out in editing when you need it.
In all the international markets, yeah.
And they're going to keep doing that. They're going to keep threading this needle to keep certain elements of Western society, which are more socially liberal.
And part of that,
and the other world, and they're going to try to satisfy them while satisfying other customers. That's business.
Yeah, and you bring that up, and I'm going to close out with this because that is a point I actually wanted to mention earlier and kind of forgot, and that is that, look, politically speaking, this is, especially for a company that is the size of Disney, that is as well known, as prestigious as Disney, this is not a fight that they can win right now in the current environment. There's no reason to try to fight it and cost, Disney itself and the stockholders out there, which includes a lot of folks watching that have 401ks and IRAs. Guess what? You own Disney stock. To have that become a problem. So they're going to trot along right now. They're going to do the things they have to do to make both sides happy. And then, as time goes on, as the social political climate might change, you'll see that reflected in some of the things that they do. But for right now, this is what we've got. And this is definitely a big step in the right direction. Again, doesn't matter which side of the issue that you may be on this. Mm-hmm. It's just the fact that Disney has not said that they agree or disagree with the bill. They have simply said, look, this is not a piece of legislation that we're going to get involved in because we run an entertainment and theme park company. This has
nothing to do with us.
This has nothing to do with us. We support this community in our own way by making products and services and welcoming that community here. We don't need to address this from an official corporate perspective. So, Kamran, thank you for being here. I appreciate this. This was a great conversation. I think this will be a very popular video. If YouTube doesn't shank it for getting into politics, we'll see how this goes.
We'll see. I mean, it's an important conversation that needs to be had because this is the way forward for Hollywood. This is the way forward for media. It's the way forward for our culture because I think the pendulum swung in a very uncomfortable, extreme place. And I think to a place where people, even as I was having a conversation with a traditional Hollywood liberal friend of mine, he's like, I don't even know what being liberal means anymore because it's now a world of just normal people and crazy people. Right. I mean, I don't even know what liberal and conservative mean. They don't mean anything anymore. He said, I was always a traditional Hollywood liberal, but I don't know what that means because this stuff is too far for me. It's too far. Right. And so we have to return the pendulum back to a more rational place where the vast majority of humanity will be comfortable and the broad ranges of its community will be comfortable at a rational place. And so this is part of the process and it's inevitable and it's happening.
Yeah, and it's good. It needs to happen. Rationalization needs to come back into the conversation for everybody out there. Again, take a deep breath and look at things factually and really ask yourself, is this really what I'm being told that it is, or do I need to take another look? So, yeah. Kamran, thank you again for coming on. Make sure everybody out there, and the link will be in the description below, as always, for Kamran's Patreon.
And we're scooping deadline now. We're scooping deadline.
You did. You actually beat deadline to the punch on this one. And that is amazing. So stay tuned to Kamran's Patreon page. He's got membership subscriptions available. It is a great place to look. That's where a lot of these conversations begin that wind up here on Valiant Renegade. And as always, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on social medias if you enjoyed the conversation. And as always, do leave a comment before you check out today. I try to respond to as many of them as I possibly can, and Kamran tries to chime in as much as he can as well on these comments. So until next time, thank you so much for being here, everybody, and take care.